Hello everybody and welcome to this third lesson of the training course App Development, Project Management and Gamification in the project Gamification ICT to Play and Play to Learn. In this class we're going through the most advanced gamification elements after seeing the most basic mechanics in the class before. If you still have any doubt on them, I encourage you to review the first part of this gamification elements lesson in order to have everything clear before we step up. If you remember the last lesson, we have been talking about basic mechanisms like PBL, points, badges, and leaderboards, and also about levels, which have a lot to do with the player journey. We'll come back to it in the next lesson when we talk about gamified experience. And also we have been talking about challenges being one of the most basic mechanisms of gamification. We ask people what we want them to do in order to activate the motivation mechanisms that will encourage them to finally do these actions by themselves. But apart from these basic elements, if you remember when we were talking about different motivations and different kind of players and how each of these user types were compelled by different actions, we were talking about a lot of mechanisms, a lot of actions. Here you have the graphs with some of them. And we are going through some of these, not everyone, but some of these mechanisms to think how can we enrich our gamified experience after we have added the most basic elements. Let's start with collections. When we talked about collections, we are talking about a motivation which is intrinsic, which is resource acquisition. A lot of people, as a natural behavior, are encouraged to acquire the most resources we have. This is a biological move to prepare ourselves for winter, for instance, or to provide food and safety to our family and friends, etc. To put this motivation to work into a gamified system, we can talk about collections. If you think about badges, we have already seen that badges are a way of collecting. You don't only have a graphic measure of your achievement, but you have a set of badges you want to unlock. Of course, each of them has a value. For instance, you remember last lesson we were talking about Foursquare, and we were talking about the first actions will get you the newbie badge, but then you'll have to go on making the key actions to get farther and farther. If you see on the right side of the image, there's some of these badges that show progress, but also there are some special badges that make users feel special because they attended a crowded event, for instance, like the Swarm badge. But what keeps people playing, what keeps people making the key actions, what makes people engaged to our app, it's the fact that they know there are more badges to come and they want to collect them. Foursquare, which was a really successful app at its launch, afterwards divided itself between Foursquare and Swarm. Foursquare was meant to work sort of as a guide of interesting places, what to do on them, tips and recommendations for social discovery of the places around. Swarm, on the other hand, will keep the check-in function and the most socializing part of it, socializing with people you know, which means, of course, in Foursquare you can share your tips and review other users' tips, and it's the social fact of recommendation what makes the app useful. But if you remember, we were talking about socializers and killers, and we were saying that some people would only feel comfortable if they have to interact with people they already know. This is what happened, and this is what led to this differentiation of Swarm and Foursquare. Users were concerned that their personal habits could be shared with a lot of strangers, like you have been checking in gyms for 3 months, and people will know that we're interested in getting fit or something like that. So people started to be really concerned about their privacy, and they divided the app. What is interesting from the gamification point of view is that this move, which had a lot of sense from the user's point of view, led to the fail of the application. People started using less and less and less both Swarm and Foursquare. Instead of having 2 successful applications, they had none. In Swarm, which is the application the left image belongs to, they didn't have badges, but stickers. As we were only comparing to our close friends, the competitive part was supposed to not be as important. Of course, you still had the ranking of how many check-ins you had done in the last days, but this achievement part was reflected in stickers and not badges, and that's what it comes. The interesting part is that stickers were not perceived as valuable as the badges were, but they have the same feeling, the collectible feeling. So achievers who had not been really encouraged by the fact that they could get all the badges, but they wanted to unlock different levels of badges. You could get a level 5 airport badge if you checked in a lot of times in different airports. Still had this thing about badges in Foursquare because they reflect achievements. In Swarm, you got them by doing simple actions. The mechanism is the same. It's exactly the same. Even the achievements that are reflected in the sticker book or the badges are quite similar, but people didn't perceive them as equivalent. This is something we will talk about also in the next lesson, because the way we talk about something is really important, okay? In this other example, you can see how ERP is working with gamification to make users engaged. This is a CRM application, even though it also works with time management in order to be useful for the most parts of the organization as possible. And the thing is that when you have a sales team, they usually know what works for them and they stick to these habits. So if you realize, there are some badges here that are associated with the key actions. Logins, accounts created, product created, which means regularity using the application, filling in the information required to make the application work correctly for the organization, and leads and contact search, which goes directly linked to their sales function inside the organization. There's also ranking, which is really important when we are talking about sales staff. They are usually very competitive people. So this is one of the places the companies have put gamification into since forever. The employee of the month, the sales executive of the month are things that have been done without technology forever. The interesting thing about Surmo, which is this application, is that if you see below, they're talking about collections: airport collection, basketball collection, biking collection. What's the difference between badges and collections in this environment? Collections are a group of items that the user will receive by chance. This chance is meant to stimulate users' curiosity. If we remember when we were talking about explorers, we were saying that people are interested in discovering, in chance, because you don't know what to expect. Okay, so it can be a really useful mechanism to motivate a certain kind of users. But the thing is that when we are talking about gamification, we were saying that we had very specific goals. So how do you put together these goals and the chance? The chance cannot be pure chance. It must be linked to key actions. So in this case, in Surma, collections can be achieved as they explore the tool. So instead of having an onboarding process, which would be really complex for a tool like this, they let users explore the application at their own path, but they encourage this by hiding different objects in the different sections. So if you only create products, for instance, you will never get the basketball collection, because the basketball collection might only be achieved by using the time management functions. This is something that it's also a regular resource for e-commerces to make users search over their catalog when it's a broad one. If we think about an Amazon, AliExpress, these kind of giants of e-commerce, there are lots and lots of categories that users might never discover. So something they can do is hiding some objects in their catalog, so people will explore these new categories they never went into to get these collectible objects. Here we have another examples of chance that it's conditioned by the fact that the user has done a previous action, which means, for instance, we can put a scratch here to win the very first time every day the user logs into the application. So there would be a chance item. They would have their curiosity engaged because they want to discover what they can win. They will have the surprise, but they know what do they have to do in order to get the possibility to get to the scratch. This is something that McDonald's has done extremely well with one of their most successful marketing actions and one of the most successful gamification actions in the company world, which is McDonald's Monopoly, which has been repeated for years and years. And even in the last years, some other companies have decided to take part into the monopoly to get benefits of this really interesting action, because as I was saying, people love this game. So you have to collect the different color pieces just as you would do in the regular game, and if you get a complete group, You could get instant rewards, enter into a prize or lotto, but the key action is that you have to buy. No possibility of playing, no chance if you don't go first through the key action, which is go to the restaurant and buy some products. Something that most of us as humans love is things that are locked. Think about the mystery that you have when you see a closed door. Think about how we love surprises. Even think about how special you felt when they allowed you to sit at that special place at your favorite spot. So, with this motivation, this basic motivation about discovery in mind, is why we design locked content. In fact, any content that we plan to include will be gradually showed. As we were talking about onboarding, we will start with the tutorial, we'll then go on for the rest of the features, and maybe we should reserve some of them only for enthusiasts. But the thing is that we will be more appealed if we know there are some hidden spaces over there. It's not the same to know that there's another chapter at the end of the book than finding some extra pages that the author had written in the path of ending the novel. Just as the director's cut scenes, we love finding things that we thought they were hidden. So here we see one way in which this mechanism has been used in a really simple application, which is meant to motivate people to make regular decisions from their daily life that will have a positive impact on the environment. And they show different scenarios from daily life, and in fact we are able to see them now. We have the hidden figures, but we see they are talking about office equipment, tidying up, keeping warm. If we let the users choose whichever they would prefer, they would probably go and explore all the categories anyway. But something we can do is unlocking them gradually to make them appear as more desirable at our users' eyes. And here we have two of the most interesting mechanisms in gamification: competition and cooperation. I like to group them together because even though they're presented as contradictory, I don't think they are so much. In fact, something that we have to understand is that we will have some players, some users, who will be really competitive, and maybe our goal there is to make them cooperate. Um, for instance, if we are talking about learning teamwork in the job, or learning soft skills, probably in app design it would be less interesting. But the thing is that mixing up competition and cooperation can enhance the way users are willing to use and recommend an application. Here's what Dropbox has done for several years. They did first the Dropbox Space Race, and then the Dropbox Campus Cap. They had the same mechanism, but different narrative. We will talk about this on the next lesson. And the objective was that the users will invite their classmates from the same university in order to make a rank of usage in universities, and for doing so they will receive some advantages, some extra features, extra space, for all the invitations we have, for the position our university had in the ranking. This is really important because university students were one of the most interesting targets for Dropbox. If people get used to saving their files in Dropbox at university, they would probably keep doing so afterwards in their professional life. So if they start saving all this, and if we are thinking about university, they would probably have lots and lots of files with all the recommended lectures, their own assignments. They will sort of get hooked at this extra space because after a while, I think it was 3 years, but I don't really remember, but like a student life cycle, the extra space would disappear. So what happens when all your documents are saved in a place that has no longer the space to keep them? Probably they will decide to upgrade their accounts to a professional account, which is a paid one. So they did this amazing campaign because they had a lot of word of mouth working at the moment. They used the competitive element between universities that is encouraged from the own institutions to appear at the top of the ranks, to attract more new students, and the competitive attitude of students, and their sense of belonging. It's a really very grateful attitude. They only invited people to use an application, but it worked. It worked really well, and almost any big university in the world was engaged in this competition, and a lot of students started using Dropbox, and started using Dropbox usually, which is really important. So we can think about competition not only as a sum-zero situation, but working with them in groups, for instance, to use the participants' killers type of ambition, but induce them to cooperate. They have to work together to achieve a shared goal. We can do so dividing participants in heterogeneous groups in order to have more variety and to level the groups, or in homogenic groups to, as in this case, to make profit of their sense of belonging. Something that it's really useful is to, for instance, is if we are trying to make people, like in this case, to start using our app, we could try to make ranks by country. This is something, it has been used also in huge enterprises, for instance, for testing their products, making extra work. And as most people have a really important sense of belonging to their nation, the fact that they were competing against their workmates from other countries made them really motivated. Or we can use departments, we can use industries. If, for instance, we are designing a software that is useful for companies, we could compare users from financial district and users from sales, wholesales. If we think about competition and cooperation as complementary, you would probably realize that there are a lot of ways to use the most competitive people to make the socializers be more ambitious, and the other way around, to use socializers and explorers to moderate the ambition of killers and achievers. Something that we can also use in this sense to level the characteristics of the users, or to force them in some way to use our application, is turns. If you think about this, it would be the same. For instance, a lot of games in this case are cooperative and they have battles. In those battles, you have only one rival, and a lot of times this competition is held on by turn. So you can't go on playing until the other person moves during their turn. So what happens? The player who is more engaged will probably be the one responsible, in some sense, of reminding the user who is more casual, who is less engaged, to keep connecting and keep using the app. This is something we could also use in our applications. For instance, if we want to make an app to gamify the tasks at home, the chores, you could make some turns, so you could help those who are more implied to tell, okay, no, my turn was over, now it's your turn. All these kind of mechanisms that force all the people to work together can level the eagerness of very engaged users and disengaged users. Also, some people will only be engaged by competition. We have to take this into consideration and find ways to get this motivation and put them to work into a positive behavior. For instance, if we don't want our users to be competing one against the other, or if we want people to be able to compete even if they are not finding friends or other users they can challenge, we can use boss fights. Boss fights are usually held at the end of the levels of the player journey, the user journey in this case, and they are like challenges that are extremely hard for some reason. Maybe you have a stronger time limitation, maybe you have less opportunities for failure, whichever limitation that makes it really hard. But we can use boss fights to mask different quests. For instance, this is something that Habitica, which is an app for personal productivity, does. They have an RPG aesthetic. We'll talk about it in the next lesson. And they have these boss fights to make people motivated to do quests. We talk about quests when we have a certain challenge that has its own objectives and rewards, like mini actions inside the global system. These are really interesting mechanisms because they allow us, for instance, to test different narratives, to see which of them will be more attractive for our users. We could use a boss fight at the space, a boss fight at the desert, or other aesthetic choices that will add up some variation to our system. In this case, we were talking about boss fights. What they do is to design bosses that you have to fight during your quest. They design these little creatures that have to do with bad attitudes and habits, and they are given some strength points and health points. And if the user goes doing their daily tasks, their habits, their pending tasks, they will get to attack the boss, and thus making it lose health points until it's defeated, and then they will receive some special reward at the end. The reward are some collectibles. We can use this as special events, for instance, in our application. This is something that a lot of games do during special events like Halloween, Christmas holidays, summer holidays. They use these events outside the game to make like little quests that should be resolved during the time during which the event will be active. So we can do so, for instance, if we have an application for helping users with their homeworks, we can do a special event for the holidays. So now that you don't have the need to log in at the app and use it because you might have some recess from your tasks, let's offer some extra rewards in order to keep people engaged. Or we can use them if we have some key performance indicators, mostly when we have an investor and we are hoping to get, for instance, a certain number of daily users, of downloads, and we are close, but we seem never get there. It's the right moment to do some kind of event like this one. And again, we can use competition and cooperation in order to make people invite their friends. Or we can talk about fighting the bankruptcy as a boss fight in order to make them involved in the good situation of our company. Why not? And talking about investors, let's get to virtual economies. Most of games and a lot of gamified applications have some kind of currency you can earn. They can be equivalent to points or different from them. It depends. A lot of applications have a different punctuation system, so some key actions which are considered more important than others, for instance, are rewarded with special points, which are the coins. In other applications, these points can be turned into this virtual currency, or on the other way around. You can monetize your app by offering people the possibility to buy some power-ups to get extra points or any kind of advantage inside the application. We talk about virtual goods there. It depends. We can talk about power-ups, of course, and maybe this makes more sense in apps, because apps are supposed to have some utility. Virtual goods are any game asset that are perceived as valuable. In free-to-play games, for instance, they are usually a really good way to make players make a small purchase, like having a special item that will only be available for a short period of time, or if they are close to winning a rival Maybe they will be more interested in buying power-ups that will give them the advantage, or we can also offer them, if there's this boss fight, this special hard level they are not being able to go through. We can also give them as a gift if we want to stop our users from frustration, but we don't want to make it really evident that we are offering them some advantage. So we can give them something and then say that it has a real money price to make it more valuable. There are some gamified systems that have done, for instance, this kind of markets you see over here. The image at the left is Mindbloom, which is an application to help people with motivation and positive attitude, positive habits, and self-development. And the feedback you will receive if you are committed with your personal development and go on with your key actions, will be that this tree will grow and shine. So we have this garden, and we can buy some items for the garden, like special weather conditions, or some kind of additions, which are mostly decorations, or some kind of power-ups like extra water. This is something that Busuu, the application for learning languages, had some time ago. They also talk about your progress in language learning as being a tree that grows and gets stronger as you progress. And they also had this idea of the garden, and they had all these little items, the scarecrow, the squirrel, that you could buy with the berries you earned when you were completing levels or special challenges. Also, as you can see in this image that, as I said, is a bit old, you could buy these berries for an extra for some extra coins. On the other way around, you could use your berries to get a discount on your premium membership. This is a way of making berries be valuable, showing that they have a reference, an equivalence in the real world. So some gamified systems, for instance, have collectibles that are exchangeable for a real-world reward. That's what we saw we had for instance, in the McDonald's Monopoly. Last but not least, we must think about avatars. Probably when you have logged in any application for the last years, they have asked you to connect your profile from any social network, mainly Facebook, and or include a profile picture. This is the simplest way of including your avatar in an application. Avatars are the virtual representation of the identity of the user. So we can include here profile pictures as a way of self-expression, of them to feel identified. For instance, if we are using rankings, we can see not only the username, but their profile picture as well. But it is more creative, more interesting if we include some options to personalize the avatar. In this way, we can have a mean not only for people to self-express, but also for us to see which kind of person they think they are. because when we do a representation of ourselves, we never do it precisely as we look in real life. We tend to exaggerate some characteristics. If you have ever played with Wii U and their Mi system that is now being implemented in other new applications from the Nintendo environment, you know, Miis are really simple creatures. The picture at the left is the one depicting a Mi, and we don't have many elements to personalize, to customize, but and we don't even have a lot of choices to do with them. But we are forced to choose which kind of exaggerated representations we think they look as ourselves. Probably if someone is extremely tall, extremely fat, has extremely big eyes, we will see it in their avatar. Also, we can see really unimportant things as we think our color, our natural hair color, is the one we should have or not. As I was saying, not everybody will choose the characteristics that really represent themselves in real life. It's really interesting if, for instance, a user decides to keep their glasses on, because of course they have no need, as they will have no visual problem in this virtual world. If they do maintain this, it's because they feel this has something to do with their identity. So if we apply this to the categories of players we have been talking about, if we let the users choose between a wide range of elements like weapons, magic powers, costumes, some kind of elements that they can add to their avatar, we will probably see really easy if they are killers, socializers, explorers. For instance, if they depict themselves as Indiana Jones, we will probably be talking about explorers. If they use every weapon we let them add to their avatar, we should be thinking about killers. And this can be a really important way to gather information about our users. Thinking about this, think about avatars not only as a single element, but as the most significant element of customization. If we let the users customize their own gaming experience, they will not only tell us information about themselves, but also they will feel more motivated. Of course, it's not the same if you think you are doing something because you've been told to, or if you are doing something because you are feeling identified with it. So we have been talking before about elements such as teams. Why not letting people choose their own team and define their own team? They could choose among certain lists of characteristics. They could choose between different categories, or they could even invent the whole name description of their team for themselves, as we are used to see in role-playing games. In this way, we will encourage their feeling of belonging. If we assignate them to certain teams, they would probably think the distribution of users is not very fair, or they could believe as we used to say, grass is always greener in our neighbor's path. So they would probably think that the rest of the teams have it easier. Let's allow them to choose their own team, to choose their own narrative, to choose their own storyline, because they will feel more listened to, they will feel more important, and they will feel like they belong to the game experience we are giving them. So this is a really interesting way to make them feel part of the gamification design experience. And until here, we have been thinking and defining and putting some examples of how to use each of the most important elements of gamification. Depending on the author or the expert you talk to, they will describe them differently. They will include more or less components, more or less elements. We have chosen here the Professor Werbach classification. Sort of, we have made certain changes, but of course, this is only a list of suggestions. Any other element that you detect that is interesting in any playful experience you have could be added to any application you want to gamify. We haven't talked about dices, for instance, but we can use them as an element of chance. So now that you have some of the pieces, some of the bricks, let's start building. And remember that any building is a completely unique construction. These elements that we have been seeing can be used all together or can be used alone. And it doesn't matter if we use all of them, some of them. In fact, we are talking about gamifying, not about making a game. So it's not required to use every element to make a full game experience, because we are talking about using the elements that would be useful for us. Remember that the choices of which elements are adequate to our project will depend on what do we want people to do, why aren't they doing it spontaneously, and the kind of people are them. So think about this and think about combination. As we talked, for instance, when we were talking about cooperation and competition, if we have a team of very competitive people and we want them to increase their work team abilities, we would probably have to be counterintuitive and use competition, because they will be more motivated if they are competing. But we will have to avoid individual competition and to let them see that sometimes collaboration makes them win also. Also, if we are addressing explorers and we know that they will be attracted to random events, we should force them in some way to make some key actions just to find the surprise. So the thing is, we use what they will be naturally attracted to in order to make them do what they are not naturally attracted to do. And we will have the possibility of using all these elements in different combinations to get the appropriate solution for any objective we have previously set. Remember, we are doing all this because we want to achieve certain goals, not only because we want to say we have gamified our app. So I think if we want people to log in more frequently, to invite their friends, to improve the time they spent using our app, and think about how are you going to make this key action interesting for your users. Something that is really useful to make these key actions interesting is to make them have a different meaning of the one they're having. It's not the same if we're asked to do the same action once again and once again and once again, because we are trying to make people develop habits. Then if we say that you have tried and this horrible magician has made you powerful, so you have to try again because you know you are the chosen one, etc. So this is the place where aesthetics come in. We will be talking about completely different experiences if we tell one story of or a different one. So when we think about which elements are important and we are thinking about the kind of people our application is targeted to, we have to think about the last gaming element, which is which kind of stories will be interesting for them. So this is in what we will focus in the next lesson.